Hi, I'm Rob Vanstone, and welcome to the hundred and something edition of the Rider Rumblings podcast. I am here with uh, the man in black, Murray McCormick. You're looking very noir today. I think that's black in French, isn't
I
it?
think
How you
it's,
doing, Murray?
but I feel it's blue. It's a blue shirt, so we're close. I think
At
it's
least,
blue.
at least you're not wearing the. I wear this one every week, so it
I
just
know.
it's
I try to give people a sense of my fashion every week. It's
the
usually
only
t-shirts.
the only change of color I have is my hair. It goes a little grayer every week, especially watching this football team. Or how's that for a smooth segue?
That's a
Um,
segue. That's
ugh.
You could lose hair in that first half alone from last week from against the BC Lions.
My goodness, what?
You know,
I mean, I've had my say. I think the season's pretty much a lost cause. I don't see a lot of hope simply because it looks like it's just going to be the same old routine every week on offense. And I think we saw this act last year with arguably a better team overall. What do you make of this?
I wish I could argue against that and say that, yeah, well, you have this, and this that's going right that you have to really say that makes your premise a little faulty. But other than the defense, man, there's not a lot to say about this team. And special teams, I guess, a little bit by Brett Lowther and Corey Vedvik. But man, like
Mary Alford's been pretty good. Mary Alford was probably the Riders' best player on him or Justin McKinnis on Friday.
Never say never, but I just somehow I never thought I'd see Cody Fajardo get pulled. And I know there was some issues with his knee and stuff, but I just kind of thought that Craig would show the wherewithal to stay with him through the troubles, through the ups and downs. And in hindsight, look, he had to pull him watching that first half again. I think he needed to be pulled. I needed to get some sort of pressure off him. But as the biggest supporter of Cody Fajardo next to his wife and his family, Rob, I think we're pretty surprised that he did that, but it had to be done. And then Cody's always been admirable for his candidness and his ability to say what's really on his mind. I've never heard a quarterback say I've lost confidence, some of my confidence. And that really surprised me. And we appreciate it. Makes for great stories because it's great filler for the week. But just a whole bunch of events that happened with Cody that I'm really still sort of dealing with and wondering how he comes back as a starting quarterback, doing the things he did and saying the things he did. So I'm kind of like you. I think, but the same token, what do they have in the cupboard? Like, is Mason Fine a guy you want to go to take on the best team, arguably the second best team in the league right now?
If you're in a rebuilding phase, if you think that you're playing the long game, maybe. But there's a Grey Cup in November, November 20th in Regina. You know, you've ostensibly built this team for November 20th. So if you have to start fiddling around with your quarterback in a year when the Grey Cup is here, not completely different from 1995, the first year in which the Grey Cup was here. And that was a team that won 6 games all year, but they couldn't decide all year whether Tom Burgess or Warren Jones was their quarterback. Well, ultimately, the answer was neither. And to have that kind of uncertainty at quarterback in a year of this magnitude is really telling and not a good look for this organization that hasn't had a lot of them lately.
But they've had some
but I think you made a really, really good point, Mer. Like to hear a quarterback that is this disconsolate when, I mean, we remember talking to Tino Sinceri, or marginal quarterbacks, and as bad as it was sometimes, they always had that air of confidence, even if there was not a lot of reason to have that confidence during a 3-win season in 2015, etc. Or but Tino had a lot of playing time in 2014 when the bottom fell out. Even Brett Smith sounded confident in 2015 when he was thrust into duty. To hear Cody, as you say, his honesty is admirable, but I think that's really telling. And if he was having confidence issues, this is my big issue or big question coming into the game Friday in Vancouver. If he had confidence issues, how eloquent of me, before this past game, what is having been pulled going to do to his psyche? This is I would submit, playoffs aside, this is Cody Fajardo's most important game as a Saskatchewan Roughrider quarterback coming up.
Wow. Yeah, it's also one of their biggest games of the season too coming up, because I really think they need to show something against the Lions on the road that they are. Can we even use the word contenders yet, or just people in the hunt in the West. But wow, that's the biggest game. Yeah, but
I mean,
as you said, when you was watching,
if he has another rough game, that's two in a row. If he ends up getting pulled, what does that say about your starting quarterback? The alternative is it's a transformative game for Cody and for the team. We haven't seen him have to rally from a situation such as this yet. He's had tough games. I remember his first year as a starter, he had an awful game against Calgary and rallied from that and ended up being named the West's most outstanding player. So it can happen, and he's proven that it can happen. But the expectations are higher now, both for himself and the team. And if they are not met, what are the consequences? What are the ramifications? Where did the Roughriders go from there? If they end up pulling Cody 2 games in a row, I think you're pretty much pulling the pin on Cody. And
yeah. Can they pull the whole offensive line too, Rob, while they're at it? Or maybe basically the tackles?
That's the issue, Murr. I mean, honestly, so much of it is focused on the quarterback. And yes, he needs to play better. But I think what we're seeing of Cody is symptomatic of a bad offensive line. I think it's symptomatic of a quarterback that has played behind that offensive line enough that there's a reason to look like you have happy feet. There's a reason to look shell-shocked, because what expectation is there that they will consistently provide you with even a fraction of the protection that you require? And that's what's not happening. I think it was almost easier for Mason Fine to look good than Cody Fajardo last week, because Mason Fine hasn't had the accumulated time behind that offensive line that would lead one to become as apprehensive as Cody appears to be. I think if Mason Fine had played as many games as Cody has this year, I think he too would look rather we should have some happy feet in the pocket and just look indecisive in the pocket, because once it's happened to you numerous times, that's got to play into your mind. Not only is it a failure happening in front of you, but it's something that can exact a physical toll because you're going to get hit. So that's my take on Cody right now. This is a real pivotal game for him and the Roughriders, and if it's a repeat of last Friday, going into back-to-back games then with Winnipeg, maybe the crossover isn't even as promising as it seems to be, or it seemed to be at one point.
Do you think we're giving Mason Fine a little bit too much credit? Like, he came in and he looked good in that touchdown drive with Justin McGinnis. I wasn't particularly blown away with the second half. It kind of
they didn't score a point in the second half.
I know, so I'm going
which seems to be team policy now.
Maybe this love affair needs to be tempered a little bit with Mason, to say that let's see what you can do something first before we start anointing you the guy who's going to take over from Cody, who's going to get pulled on.
I liked what I saw of Jake Dolegala in that one game more than I've been impressed with what I've seen of Cody Fine, of Mason Fine overall. But Jake Dolegala had nobody on offense. He had Ken Schaefer-Baker in the tailbacks. And but just that was a COVID-ridden team, and Jake Dolegala, that to me is the more intriguing of the understudies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
if they get to that point where they're mining number 3 in this season, then they've really got issues. Somehow they've got to fix Cody, and Cody's got to fix Cody. And but even if they can they fix that offensive line? There's been no sign yet that they are willing or able to do it. Well, I shouldn't say willing. They've released Natai Rogers, but then you end up playing people who for the first half of the season were adjudged to be not as good as Natai Rogers, and the offensive line wasn't even remotely better than it was previously.
Can we get excited about the possibility, or not the possibility? Kyran Moore's back. Shaq Evans may be back. Of course, was always as an addition. There's subtraction. There's Duke Williams.
There's no Duke Williams. There's no Justin McInnis this week.
And there's no Jamal Morrow, too, in the running back area, too. Yeah. So the Riders get something and they lose something. So I'm excited to see. One thing I've noticed about Kyran Moore, I think he's bigger. I think he's made himself stronger upper body wise. He looks a little heavier. So maybe that'll be something. I don't know if he's faster or not, because you can't. It's hard to tell if a guy's faster in practice, but I think that's a good one. And in a normal Cody year, we'd be touting that as, look, it's, the band's back together. These guys are all back together. And instead of always kind of talking about what Cody's going to do, and maybe overlooking the fact that he's going to get some more weapons than he's had in the last little while too, which I think.
And he's not, but is he going to get better protection?
Well,
it doesn't matter. I mean, I wrote the other day they could have Don Narcisse, Weston Dressler, Joey Walters, Ray Elgard, and Hugh Campbell as a receiving core in their primes. But if you don't have an offensive line, it doesn't matter. And that's the thing that is continues to be troubling. And
But they aren't going to have an offensive line, Rob. We know that's not going to happen.
Well, then they better be prepared to win a lot of 9-6 football games, right?
Yeah, that's and I think the defense can do that, especially now that. And I know it's a big loss for the league, it's a big loss for all of us with Nathan Rourke going down. That was, I don't like to use tragic in sports, but it was really sad to see what happened to him. It wasn't a dirty hit. It wasn't anything other than a football injury. But, he's going to be gone till October. We get Michael O'Connor, which... If that, you and I, the backup is a Canadian. Like, you keep saying never say never in the CFL, and out trots the backup Canadian. And I heard him talking the other day, and he seems confident. He seems to be ready to do the job there, just as everybody says they prepare to play. I'm not quite sure what kind of offense they're going to have. Like, you still got arguably the best receiving core in the league, led by arguably the best receiver in the league in Brian Burnham, who still has that amazing catch against Derek Moncrief for the touchdown. But, taking Nathan Rourke out of their equation maybe gives the Riders a bit of a chance, more of a chance on the road in a tough building to play in. That's traditionally, and we're talking August in Vancouver, and if the roof's open, it's still hot and muggy in there no matter whatever happens.
But the Riders have tended to win in Vancouver.
I know, that's kind of a strange one, but it's always
I did a story on Kyron Moore, and I mean, he's 4-0 in Vancouver. So winning in Vancouver hasn't been the problem. Winning lately for the Roughriders has been the problem. Defeating BC has been the problem. I think it reduces the pressure on the Roughrider offense to I don't think they're going to be involved in a shootout this coming Friday. So, I mean, if they can put 20 points on the board, they should be able to win. I think this defense facing Michael O'Connor should have the upper hand. But can they even put 20 points on the board? They're still facing the same Lions defense that has given them all sorts of trouble. Yeah. And ever since the Riders got up 17-4 on the Lions on July 29th, I mean, what's the 28-10? It's 56-10 in the Lions' favor. Eek. Mm-hmm. Right? So enjoy the game on Friday, everyone.
And especially an 8:30 start. Well, an 8:30 start for Saskatchewan, which makes it another one of those late games that you hear people grumbling about, that the schedule, why is this? But they want to have double headers.
What do you do when if you're playing games on the West Coast? They're going to be later games, right? What do you do? So,
and I've been reading about the Lions, and it's kind of, I'm looking forward to going there because they sound like they're doing all they can to sell the game outside of the field. There's a party
aside from canceling your interview with Nathan Rourke.
Yeah, that's true. I'm hoping I can get
so much for promotion.
Hopefully I can get Michael tomorrow when I'm there. But it sounds like they're doing everything they can to get football fans or non-football fans interested in the team, which is exciting. I think it's one of those teams that kind of needs it. Losing Nathan Rourke is a big blow because he's so, even though my interview got canceled, I did get to talk to him before the game though last week. He's such a big selling point for the league, and it was, even now I think people are still going, wow, that's too bad. And it's interesting. I did that story with Jerry DiTilio, and Jerry DiTilio had all this praise for Nathan Rourke with the caveat if he stays healthy, and it was kind of prophetic for
when's the last time you heard Roughrider fans or CFL fans in general as despondent over the injury to a player? It cast a pall over the stadium on Friday. Not that Roughrider fans were in a good mood to begin with, but then you see Nathan Rourke is likable a player, is fun to watch a player as there's been, my goodness, since Warren Moon, and for that to go down, it's one of the best stories to come out of the Canadian Football League, I would argue, ever, and just one of those feel good news stories. And
I'll put you on the spot, Rob. I'm going to put you. Name the next best story to come out of the CFL this year, and can you come up with one?
Yeah, that is a poser. I mean, Winnipeg's having a good year, but Winnipeg having a good year isn't novel. Edmonton hasn't been much fun at all, has it? No. Calgary has been generally unremarkable. Oh my goodness. Toronto's been Toronto.
It's really
Help
hard to
me
come up with
here.
a.
What else belongs on the podium if you were to rank the top three, stories in the CFL this year? My goodness, Ottawa is a mess once again. Hamilton's
There's no
Montreal
personalities.
is you
Maybe the top story is, and I think when we're babbling on about quarterbacks, is Calgary supposedly going to bench Bo Levi, and they have a 6-2 record. I'm going to write that 6-2, and they're benching their quarterback.
Maybe that's something that Cody can look at and say, okay, it hurts to be benched, but I talked to Jason Moss about it yesterday, and he says that's what happens when you're a quarterback. It's going to happen. But if you look around the landscape and you're seeing Bo Levi Mitchell with his amazing credentials, and he's only about 2 years older than Cody. Mm-hmm. If they can bench Bo Levi Mitchell, well then who's to say that Cody Fajardo can't be sat down?
But it's a little different scenario. Oh, sorry. Excuse me.
Sorry.
It's a
I
different
talked to Jason
scenario.
Moss about it yesterday, and I mean, back in 2005 when he helped Edmonton win a Grey Cup, a lot of the Edmonton success in some pretty big games that year was Ricky offense hits the wall with Ricky Ray, in comes Jason Moss. Yeah. And Jason Moss worked some wonders as Edmonton's number 2 quarterback. Well, guess what? The next week, Ricky Ray was always the starter, and in the Grey Cup in 2005, he was magnificent. But that didn't happen without some detours and some potholes, and that sometimes led to the removal of the quarterback, and in came Jason Moss. But that didn't result in Ricky Ray being supplanted as the number 1 quarterback. And when you consider what a mentor and friend Ricky Ray is to Cody Fajardo, maybe there's a chance to use some historical perspective and to say, okay, Cody, it's happened, but guess what? It's happened to the best of them.
The Calgary situation is a little differently, that you're replacing Bo Levi with, I think, an almost proven quarterback in Jake Meyer. He's won for teams. He's come in these situations for injury. I think there's a big gap between Jake Meyer and Mason Fine. I think that's what we see right there. I mean, so a little different. It's a little different situation. It is the same that here's a guy who newspapers and everyone has touted as being, the franchise quarterback, the face of the franchise, everything for him, leads him to all these wins and stuff, and he can be replaced rather quickly and rather unexpectedly. Well, I didn't see a lot of that game. Sorry about that. I was on the way to the stadium and stuff, but what I did see of Bo was not very good, or not for his standards. I think he had 48 yards in the first half. Does that ring a bell? I'm not quite sure.
Well, he did have a long pass, I think, to Bale, but that aside, there wasn't much. Let me just check here. But it's just, again, it's an eventful week for quarterbacks in the Canadian Football League, and if it can happen to Bo, it can happen to Cody. So maybe that gives them a chance to say, okay, yeah, it happens. Bo Levi passed for 149 yards.
I knew the 40 was in there somewhere. Yeah.
So, but 2 interceptions.
Yeah.
And a QB rating of 35.7. Cody was, I think, 2. So,
and I forget who Calgary plays. Who's Calgary play?
Who does Calgary play this week?
Sorry, professional podcasters would have that information at their fingertips.
We've been so hyper focused on the Roughriders. I honestly haven't looked at the rest of the schedule this week. It's just like Roughriders versus Toronto versus. Now I don't even know who the Riders are playing. Roughriders versus BC on Friday night. And that has been an absolute obsession of a game. I mean, if they go into BC and it's reminiscent of the last 6 quarters against BC, like the Roughriders as a whole need to reestablish their credibility. And if they don't win, suddenly they have a losing record going into back-to-backs against Winnipeg. So you're probably staring at a 5-8. And that's, I think I've made that sound a few times during this podcast, but this whole the Roughriders this of late just inspire the
And if you think about how long we've been doing these podcasts and the Rider Rumblings, that it's been pretty positive with the Riders. There's been some ups and downs, but nothing as extensive like this. And, you've been accused of being Cody's biggest supporter, and I think rightfully so. But I also think now we got to take a look. And what does it say about the upper level of the Riders now that Cody's in these issues? Does it say something about Craig Dickinson? Does it say something about Jeremy O'Day?
I
what's
don't think it says
happening
a
with
lot about
this.
Craig Dickinson. I think Craig Dickinson is largely in the same boat as Cody. You can only do what with what you have, do what you can with what you have, and I mean the lack of an offensive line is that impedes Craig Dickinson as a head coach as much as it impedes Cody Fajardo as a quarterback, um, because 1/3 of your team isn't there, and so I think Jeremy O'Day is the and Paul Jones are the ones that should have to answer for the fact that the Roughriders are so mediocre. Haven't trotted out that word in a while, but um,
Yeah.
why didn't that offensive line get fixed? It's not like it was not the number one issue coming into this season and emanating from last season. Their offensive line wasn't good enough last year, and I think it's much worse this year. The Roughriders quarterbacks have been sacked 37 times this
Yeah, I
year
know. It's crazy.
in 10 games. Well, guess what? That's as many times as the Riders were sacked in all of the 2019 season. And there's 8 games difference between where the Riders are now and finishing the season. So, I mean, we're talking a sack count in the 60s, maybe pushing 70. You just can't win football games that way.
Can we blame?
And I think Jason Moss is impeded too, because what can he do schematically, knowing that he doesn't have an offensive line? It's I said on CJME yesterday that it's like trying to win the Kentucky Derby with Mr. Ed, and that's the kind of position the Roughriders are in right now. And I think that is a personnel issue, and that is a Jeremy O'Day issue, and that's where I think the problem lies. Jeremy O'Day's made some tremendous moves to upgrade the defense. Bringing in Mario Alford is in the special teams, but the offensive line is terrible. And from a former offensive lineman, I think you'd certainly expect a team with a former offensive lineman as a general manager. I think you'd expect a team that at least is reflective of what was his, stock in trade as a player, and that was as an offensive lineman. But that's a terrible offensive line. So where does the finger point?
Do we point at his knee? Do we point at Cody Fajardo's knee? I know it's the last little while, 2 games. I'm thinking he's looked more Fajardian. Like he's had that spin move. He's appeared to be moving more, has more mobility when he has an opportunity to run with the ball. I don't know if the knee is a huge issue anymore. He mentions the brace.
Olivia and Lawrence asked Cody the other day if the knee was a factor, and he said absolutely not. Now, the knee obviously isn't 100%, but a quarterback with a sore knee and more compromised mobility behind that offensive line, I think it's another symptom of a bad offensive line. And you can't, even 100% healthy Cody would have trouble behind that offensive line. But when your quarterback's hampered in any way, then it's really magnified, and it's the worst of both worlds. Bad offensive line and a quarterback who's not 100%
against a defense that's playing at 100%. And Lucius Purifoy had a game. There was
and now the Riders are playing teams that are tougher. They got through the first half of the season was supposed to be the easy part, and they were 5-4, and now they're playing BC, Winnipeg. I mean, at the end of the year they have Calgary. So they're into the meat of their schedule, and they didn't really have a chance. After starting off 4-1, they didn't really take advantage of advantageous or what should have been advantageous scheduling, and now they're playing the teams with the tougher defenses, the tougher teams overall. And if you can't get through the preliminaries at 5-4, what are you going to do in the games that are more reminiscent of main events?
And they're missing.
I know. Look at her.
Dog break. Pause for
thought.
Look at her. Pause for thought. Dog tails.
There we go.
Bark.
Had to get her in.
What do you think the impact of not having Jamal Morrow is going to be on them, Rob? I know that the running game is a sense of raises the Riders' lack of running game. They seem to start off really quickly with using Morrow, setting that tone, setting rush. He's going, oh boy, maybe this is a game where it's all going to happen. Then he has a broken hand and he's gone for 6 to 8 weeks or 4 to 6 weeks in that area.
Close to the remainder of the regular season.
And we get Frankie Hickson, who's shown great potential as the backup and has looked good. And do you think he can step up for 5 carries a game, maybe 4 receptions?
Jamal Morrow was also one of the keys to their receiving game, to their passing game. So they're missing him there as well, and it's suddenly, Frankie Hickson is your complement and a very good one. Now your complement is Keenan LaFrance.
Yeah, no.
So that's the thing too. Your two-headed running attack, which should have been accentuated more, um, is no longer there. And they gave it a shot last week. I mean, Morrow's first two carries were impressive. Frankie Hickson's first two carries were for 5 and 6 yards, and then they just abandoned it. And granted, the game got out of hand scoring wise, but it's teams tend to they get behind by 10 points and they forget that there's 30, 40, 50 minutes left on the clock, and they abandon everything and play into the defense's hands. But they got away from what, if there is a core to that offense, it is the ability to run the ball with some proficiency. And I think the promise and potential of that running game is seriously diminished without Jamal Morrow. They just can't win. I mean, they have Kyran Moore coming back this week, maybe Shaq Evans, but you lose Duke Williams for a week or two or three, and now Jamal Morrow for a much longer period than that. And Justin McKinnis coming off the best game he's played in the Canadian Football League, 6 catches for 111 yards, and now he's out too. So, or it appears that he will be as of our recording time on Wednesday morning.
He was moving really slowly when he came to meet the media, and sometimes you've seen players hurting a little bit, but he looked really banged up. So that's one of the things you miss without Justin. Rob, I keep taking ourselves back to the beginning of the season and training camp when we're positive and optimistic and everything seemed, this was a team, great receiving core, issues with the offensive line, but they brought in a Ty Rogers, and Taron Vaughn was on the horizon, and Dan Clark was in there. And now the word I keep thinking of coming up with instead of all this is mess. What a mess. And I don't know, we're supposed to have the solutions. We keep offering all the reasons why it's a mess. We have no solutions other than, if they win, does that take the pressure off them? Does it put a little smile on Rider Nation face heading into the Labor Day game? Or does it still, win, but with perspective on the fact that this isn't a Grey Cup contending team at this time?
If they win, and they pulled Michael O'Connor and the BC offense down, people are going to say, and I think with some justification, yeah, but there's no Nathan Rourke. How are you going to do against Winnipeg?
Yeah.
If they lose, ugh. If they win, there may be a bit of an asterisk depending upon the circumstances. If they win 40-38, then that the O'Connor was in there argument is gone, because they will have had to have outscored somebody. But I just wonder what the climate's going to be like after those back-to-backs against Winnipeg. It's if they can find some Labor Day magic, maybe that puts them in a better place going down the stretch. But it's easy to emit gloom and doom when a team's lost 4 out of 5, and even the one they won on July 8th was tainted with the whole Garrett Marino mess. There's that word again. So it's been the better part of the July and August that we've been picking apart the Saskatchewan Roughriders, and a lot of people have. And suddenly you're 10 games into an 18-game schedule. It doesn't usually seem in late August that much of the schedule has been exhausted, but they're getting into the stretch run, such as it is, really, really quickly, and it's approaching dire if it isn't already.
I kind of think it was always about what was going to happen with this back-to-back, playing Winnipeg 3 times out of the 4, 3 times in 1 month. It was all going to be, that was going to prove what the Riders really were they one of these teams chasing them? But that's what I kind of thought. I heard one of the guys on the radio yesterday make an interesting point that since that Garrett Marino mess, this has been a different team. This has been a team that hasn't played with the confidence. The injuries have piled up. That Garrett Marino, his antics seem to have carried over from game to game, and they haven't appeared to put it behind them as much as they're trying. Like, I noticed on halftime, the TSN panel talked about Garrett Marino more than anything else the other day. And I was going like, he's good, but he's not, I don't know if that it warrants that much discussion, but that's an interesting theory. Has that game against Ottawa, which appeared to show all sorts of things with Garrett Marino, maybe signs of his teams, is kind of where this all kind of fell apart. It's an interesting
Well, they won 28-13 against Ottawa, and all anybody was talking about, including the Roughriders, was Craig Dickinson. It wasn't just a media manufactured scenario. Craig Dickinson was so disgusted he didn't distribute game balls after that game.
Yeah.
So it wasn't just the media creating this whole situation. Internally, that was a stink bomb that went off in Riderville. Mm-hmm. And people talk a lot about mojo. Well, they seem to have some mojo after being 4-1 against, granted against weaker opposition, but they played really well against Ottawa, and a lot of the things that we are lamenting now weren't even discussed back on July 8th, and since then they're 1-4, and it's a real tipping point for this organization. 4-1 after the win against Ottawa, and 1-4 since, and with the one victories against an Edmonton team that they pretty much donated the game to them. They've struggled to beat Edmonton in both games played at Commonwealth Stadium this year. So even the one victory, you look at it and will say, well, that wasn't especially impressive. So what promise is there after this? It's a real, not only for Cody Fajardo, but I think for the whole organization, they have to at least show that there is a pulse and there is some hope. If they're sub 500 heading into September, well, last time I checked, even the Labor Day Classic isn't sold out, which is telling.
It's also an interesting scenario that since that July 8th game, they've had one guy suspended. They've had Duke Williams suspended. Now they have Gary Johnson Jr. suspended for whatever happened on the weekend. You ever heard of three guys?
The S on the helmet stands for suspended now.
You ever, we may look, but 3 suspensions in one season? That's got to be a team record. Excuse me, folks. I'm going to have a little cough here, too. Take it from there, Rob.
No, I can't remember. This seems like more than a season. Like there's been so much even in the past month and a half, 2 months. It's just the ongoing drama. I wouldn't say that it's become a circus, although it was during the Garrett Marino week. And the Roughriders didn't contain the Garrett Marino situation very well, to the point where he's gone for 4 games. He comes back, and then the first thing anybody's doing at practice, Garrett Marino's first day back, is interviewing him. A story that should have been contained weeks ago. It's just it's team distraction, and it's tough for them to get any continuity going because there's just the injuries have been chronic, and we are where we are now. There is some good news, Murr. You were at the Rider annual meeting.
And, I knew you were going to throw that. You know me in numbers, Rob. Absolutely.
Well, there's virtual $3.9 million profit based on last season's operations. I was surprised they made that much money, considering that attendance wasn't robust last year.
But the merchandise sales, and I'll have to look over at my notes. I know where the merchandise sales were great. Again, they had nearly $4.5 million of merchandise sales. Sponsorship sales were $7.2 million. Ticket revenue wasn't as great. We know that. It was an $11 million gate. But compared to 2019, they had nearly a $17 million gate with 4 more. But yeah, it's funny. Just when you're ready to write this team off, they find a way to kind of go, hey, look at this. They made money on a season that was shortened, a product that was, shall we say, less than stellar, missing some of the big, without training camps and those kind of things. And you and I look out over the stands all the time and we see empty seats. We don't, but that's part of the configuration of the stadium too, with people wandering around. But yeah, they surprised me. I never expected that number. I expected it's actually more than the Blue Bombers made, slightly more than the Blue Bombers made with the Grey Cup year and all that stuff. So that's one of the points. Yeah, but and so basically, you have to say they're on pace to do well again this year with a Grey Cup coming here, regardless of who's playing in it. That's going to make money for the Riders. And, Craig said it's a multi-year recovery, and it's going to be multi-year recovery. Craig Reynolds, I'm talking about the president of the team. But they could be in pretty good shape in another year or two, which you and I would never have believed after a cancellation of the season and then a shortened game of a season and all the things that have gone on. So Rider Nation continues to surprise, and, maybe this is the league's one of the league's best franchises when it comes to that kind of stuff. But boy, you got to have the product on the field to offset some of all of this. It kind of takes away from all of this good news that is happening.
I remember 2011, they made a ton of money in 2011. Didn't matter. That team sucked. There was a time when you looked at the Rider balance and it was critical to the team's survival. They're not in that mode anymore. But coming out of a pandemic, it's certainly a tonic for them to do what they did. We have a question. We have our first reader question or viewer question of the year. It's from Dave McLean, and he's wondering about the status of Micah Tights. Murr? Go.
That's a question I've had in my mind and reminded myself to ask a couple of times.
But he's on the 6-game list.
He's still on the 6-game list.
He would have 2 games left on that.
Yeah, so it's just his second bout
on his second stint on the
second stint,
6-game list.
I wish I had an answer. I'm going to say your answer is Larry Dean. There's no reason to rush Micah Teitz back regardless of what's wrong with him. I have seen him at practice the last little while. I never saw him in the first third of the season. So, with Larry Dean there, it's a question that's questionable, but boy, how do you get him back on the roster?
How do you mess with that linebacking core?
Yeah, and Larry Dean's so good. So good. He'll always have the Achilles tear, but boy, of the four of them that went down, he's just come back and played like an all-star. And so maybe the answer to your question is, when is Micah Teitz back? Well, I don't think it's a big issue right now because they're going to go with Larry Dean till something happens to him. But thanks for the question.
Micah Teitz will help the team. He's a tremendous special teams player, and Larry Dean is 34 years old, so maybe you can get a bit of a breather here and there. We've got to run, but not without the traditional exit that I recite so shakily every week. So here we go.
Forgot it?
I know it. I should know this by heart by now. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave a review and a 5-star rating. It helps us grow the podcast. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. I get my podcasts on my phone. I don't even know what that function is. It just says podcasts. It works great. If you'd like to send us a question, you can email Rob at rvanstone@postmedia.com, and we'll read it on the show as we have just demonstrated. You can follow me, Rob, on Twitter at Rob Vanstone, or Murray at MurrayLP. And as always, do not tweet Murray Mandrick when you're intending to tweet Murray McCormick or vice versa.
Perfect.
Right, Murray Mandrick?
Right. I got called Murray Mandrick the other day, too. And I don't think we even look remotely alike, but we do share a fabulous first name.
And on that fabulous note, we'll sign off. Who knows what we're going to be talking about next week, given this wondrous Roughrider season that we are experiencing for one of the top two Murrays at the leader post right now. I'm Rob Vanstone, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks for your time and take care.